Hello and welcome everyone to another Inkarnate live stream. Today we're going to be continuing on our castle series. We're going to be covering the Motte and Bailey. If you're not sure what a Motte and a Bailey is, it's a type of castle. It's on top of a mound, which is referred to as a moat, and a Bailey is an enclosed area, usually enclosed by palisade walls or just walls in general. So I'm super excited about this. The use cases for this type of encounter are endless, so we'll be covering some of those use cases. If you want to follow along in this video or stream, go ahead and check out the map link in the chat. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll find it in the video description. Hey, first time chatter, welcome. All right, so let's get hopping, okay? So first of all, let's just go over a quick little diagram because it's kind of hard to know what exactly what we're kind of making without having some kind of diagram to make sense. Hey, first time chat at Mikachu, want 1303, welcome, glad you are here. So it's always nice to have a little bit of a diagram to kind of give us an idea of what we're building. So like I said before, a motte is a mound. Just think of the word mound, right? Both begin with an M. A motte is a mound, okay? And then the Bailey part is where these palisade walls, within these palisade walls is referred to, that enclosure is referred to as a bowl, as a palisade or a Bailey, sorry about that. So within the palisades enclosed area is the Bailey. So this is what we're gonna be creating. Let's go over a couple other items real quick in the diagram. So there's an entrance that goes into this way. That's why you see this drawbridge right here. That drawbridge goes up, and underneath the drawbridge is a moat. Now, you don't have to use a moat if you don't want to. You can actually fill it in with it can just be a ditch. You can fill it in with spikes, whatever it is you want. It doesn't really matter. I'm just using water because it's the most generic for most moats or ditches. But as long as there's some kind of large, some height, it's very difficult to attack positions like this when you're going uphill. Really, the attackers who have the height advantage, they have that big advantage. Well, the defenders would not. Notice there's also a moat on this side as well. Okay. Now, there's also what's referred to as the palisades. That's that wall. That's the actual walls. They're called palisades. They're usually made of wood, and sometimes they're temporary, sometimes they're not. It just depends. Next is referred to as the flying bridge. It's called the flying bridge just for the same reason that a flying buttress is called a flying buttress. It's just that it's pretty much propped up. It's like a flying buttress, and it's buttressed up. So flying bridge just means the same thing as a flying buttress, only its function as a bridge instead of a support for the side of a cathedral building. Hey, a lot of first-time chatters here. Awesome. Awesome. So glad that you are all here. We got Heyope and Soul Invictus Art. Cool. Sweet. Okay. Now on top of the moat, or the motte, sorry, not moat, is going to be the keep. Okay. And the keep can be a simple wooden structure. It doesn't have to be anything fantastic, or it can just be an enclosed area where you want a tent, or you want maybe a tribal leader to live. For when it comes to the purpose with the battle map, you don't need to follow historical rendition. You can use it for whatever fantasy purposes your campaign is about, okay? So we'll go over some use cases, like I said. So we're going to be building this. Now, the first step, or as always, whenever I do it, I try to follow what's called a process, okay? Whenever you're working on a map, if you feel like you get lost, you create a process. So I'm going to go ahead and show you the process that I use. And the first step in the process is setting a scale. The way that you set scale is by first turning on a grid, okay? So let's go ahead and turn on the grid first. And I've made my grid specifically massive on purpose. I actually like really large battle maps for my encounters for multiple purposes. You might resize it. We have an incredible feature for resizing. You might use it for multiple encounters. There's a whole lot of reasons why I like big ones. Also, just more room for players to maneuver around. So by setting scale, I'm going to decide how big one of those little tiny squares is. And I'm just going to follow the pretty much the standard. That's going to be 5 square feet, okay? And my grid is, let's take a look here, what the dimensions are. It's 40 by 53 So it's going to be 20 feet across, while 265 feet long. That is a absolutely massive battle map. You don't have to make them that big. Every DM and players have their choice about how big they like their battle maps. I've talked to some people who like small ones, talked to other DMs who like huge battle maps. It's really up to you. It's a personal kind of decision. So now that we've set our 5-foot square grid, this is going to help us determine the size of a lot more things, because now we have a scale to follow. When you're placing your stamps, you'll know like, ooh, is this crate too big or too small? So we've set scale. Next in that process is to create the terrain. It's super important to create terrain. As always, you start from the ground up. You don't build a building on nothing, right? It needs something to rest upon. So you build terrain and then build upward, okay? You wouldn't start with the opposite, building up and then going down. Don't do that in real life. So let's do that. Let's not do that in our building process either, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and just mention that what's really nice about these Motte and Baileys is that the shape for top down is really just a figure 8. That's how easy a Motte and Bailey is, right? And then you would just need access, like a bridge going to this one and a bridge going to this one. And up here would be your, on top of this mound or motte would be your keep, while inside this Bailey would be a series of structures. If you're looking at it from a historical sense, within the Bailey would be generally important infrastructure, like a blacksmith, a farmer, where there's farms, or if depending on how wealthy the lord is, if the lord is very wealthy, then obviously they're going to be able to afford a lot more infrastructure within their Bailey and the materials required for those building projects. When it comes to fantasy, there's a whole list of things that you can do with this kind of a castle. So we'll really decide that later. Let's go ahead and just pull up the terrain. And for those of you who are wondering how I put the terrain together, don't worry, I'm going to cover all of this stuff. So that way you're not like, whoa, you just brought it up, but how did you do it? Don't worry, I will show you. So the first step is to do the figure 8 like I just said. You would fill first the entire map. I'm using a specific aspect ratio. I'm just using portrait because the figure 8 is tall. So I'm not going to use landscape. And you're going to first fill with this fill button. It's going to fill the entire editor or canvas with the add mode of the mask tool, this add right here. Once you've clicked the fill all and it fills the whole thing up, then you'll click the subtract button and then the circle brush, and then you'll pick the size that you want. You can hold down the shift key and the mouse scroll wheel, and then you would take that and go just make a figure 8 with the subtract mode, and it's going to create these 2 islands. These 2 islands are going to be the 2 mounds or mottes that the keep and the palisades are going to sit on. So that's the first step. Now let's go ahead and throw down the terrain stamps that I used, and I'll show you how to put this together so you're not confused by it, because I know some people are like, well, how did you put that together? Don't worry, we're going to do a demo for that. So let's go ahead and turn the terrain on. And what I've used is I've only used two things to make this. One, I've used these, let's turn the grid off, by the way. I won't be needing it right at this very second. Let's just put the terrain down. So I've used these hills that have a clipping mask, and these hills are not hard to find. You just type in hills in the catalog. So if we just open up the catalog, or you can press the F key, it will take you right into it, and just type in hill. Oopsie, that's not what I wanted. Let's type in hill here. One moment. Okay, here we go. Type in hill. And you're going to notice that there are 2 kinds. There's a craggy and a rocky. I just used the craggy ones. And making a circle is fairly easy. Just take a circular piece like this, and just note that these have what's called a clipping mask. Okay, that means whatever's on the FG layer, that's what these clipping masks are going to pick up. Notice that when I drag it over the section, that's the subtract mode of the mask tool, but it's still picking up the texture on the FG layer, okay? But you just need to take one and then take the exact same one and just rotate. You can rotate by holding down the control key and the mouse scroll wheel, and just put together a circle. You see how I'm putting them side by side until it creates a circle shape. Like this, see? So not really that difficult. Really, you only need to make half the circle, copy, paste, or if you really want, make a quarter of the circle, copy, paste 4 times, and rotate to make a full circle. Not complex, pretty easy stuff. Let's go ahead and remove those. So that's how I made the circles that you see here. That dark shadow is made with the path tool. If you're not familiar with how to make a shadow with the path tool, just make any type path. I set it to 5 width, 100% opacity, change it to black. And let's also change, let's not worry about the shadow. Let's just blur it. And we're going to blur it as much as we can. And what you notice is that it starts to fade out. This is a great way to start painting in shadows. What's really cool is you don't need a pen to do this. You can totally do it with a mouse. So I'll give you an example. I'll do it with my mouse. I'll just click, hold, drag like this. And you notice that it kind of creates a little bit of a dark kind of shadow, making it look like there's depth there. Remember, the trick to depth, if you want to show depth or height, is ambient occlusion. A nice dark, hard shadow or light faded out shadow can help to make something seem like it's popped out. Let's take a step back and look at it. You notice that that section has that black line there. It kind of looks like that there's some depth there. So that's the trick with using the path tool for shadows. So now that you know how to do that, we've used hills and we've used the path tool to create a shadow. Now that we've created the terrain, we have to go into the next step. After terrain comes walls. We need to create the enclosures or the bailey. To do that, we need to use Palisade Walls. Okay? Now, if you go into the catalog, there should be Palisades there already. And the same method that I did to create a circle with the hill stamps is the same method that I would use to put together these Palisade Walls to create a circle. So it's not complex, right? It's just you can piece them together and just follow the circle. Now, if you feel it's too square, you can use smaller segments. I just want to tell you that's a secret. If you want to create a better circle with more curve, use smaller segments. See the difference when I put together a few of these, 3 of these, in comparison to 2 of those. You notice that the circle is a little bit better. It's a little bit more curved. When you're using those longer Palisade Walls, it's going to have more of a polygon shape. So just keep that in mind. One thing you can do is just scale them down, but remember to keep to scale, okay? So now that you know how to put the Palisade Walls together, I can go ahead and just turn them on. I've showed you how to do it. And the one thing you need to remember also is that you have to leave open spaces for the gatehouses, the flying bridge, the drawbridge, all of those things. You're going to make sure that you have an opening. So look here. Here's the entrance that leads into the top of the motte where the keep is. Here is the entrance where the flying bridge goes up. And here's where the drawbridge will be. Okay? Now that we've done walls, we have to do the next step. You see, the reason why you do walls is because you need to create the boundaries of the area that you're trying to create. These Palisade Walls create the boundary in which the players can maneuver on top of those mottes. Okay? After you've done that, you have to factor in access. Remember I circled those things right there? So the next step is access. How do they get to these forts? How do they get there, right? So the way that you do that is you need to put down make some bridges or some kind of access. So we'll go ahead and open up those and I'll show you how to put these together as well. Not as complex as you think. I'll open up my access group and I'm going to do the first one, which is going to be the entrance, right? Because it's where you started. Now, if you're curious how I made these are not complex. Those square wooden tops right there represent the top of 2 towers. All I used was what's called a landing in the stair set. So let me go ahead and just show you how that real quick so you can find it, but it's referred to as a landing. If I just type in stair in the search field, oh, there's a missing T there. Isn't that nice? Let's type in stair, press enter, and just give it a moment to load. At most stair sets have a landing. So what we'll do is let's go ahead and pick the same one that we had here. If I click this rustic stair, you'll see right here that there's a landing. All I did was just make it a little bit brighter, because remember the trick to height is contrast. So if you want this platform to look like it's higher up than those Palisade walls, just go over to the color adjustment. There should be a color adjustment, and then you can change it to be brighter. So things that are higher up, increase the brightness. Things that are farther down, make them a little bit darker. Okay? That's really a sneaky trick. Now, on top of those two defensive platforms, there's obviously a ladder as well that kind of leads up. This is so that defenders can get to the top of this platform right here and rain down hell onto their attackers, okay? And then this centerpiece right here is just a bench from the Farmstead pack. That's it. I just took a bench. And one thing I want you also to notice is that there is a dark black shadow around these. And that dark shadow does what? Makes it look like they're higher up, right? If you want that trick of depth, contrast. That's the biggest trick, contrast. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one. What you do is when you finish making one of these little gatehouses, group it all together and then copy and paste it. So if I go to the bridge gate right here, I just went ahead and copied and pasted it, and there it is again. I just didn't put ladders on it that time. Let's also make some bridges as well. Let's actually do the last gatehouse real quick. The last gatehouse is right here, the keep gatehouse. Let's open that up. There's that third one. I put ladders on that one, okay? You just type in ladder and you'll find it in the search field. Okay, so the next is the bridges. There's going to be 2 of them. The first is going to be that drawbridge, and I use the path tool to create rope. You can see the path tool here. I just used the path tool to create rope so it looks like the bridge comes up. And then the flying bridge, which is right here. And this is simple. The flying bridge, the bridges are just made with the wooden roof pieces. And then one trick that I'll show you that you might find interesting to show some depth, because right here, this flying bridge right here is creating a bit of an angle here. How is it that I portray the idea that there's an angle? Here's the trick. I used, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4 of these. This one right here is set to 100% brightness. This one right here is set to 90% brightness. This one is set to 80% brightness. This one is set to 70% brightness. Now, what that does is create a kind of a gradation between light and dark, making it look like it's going down, okay? Remember the trick, contrast. I cannot tell you how important contrast is to creating depth, all right? It's super important in art, and therefore it's going to be important to your battle maps, because battle maps are art, right? So now we've put together all of our access, right? We want players, defenders, and attackers to be able to access it. So you go through here, walk around in the Bailey area, and then go across the flying bridge into this other smaller Bailey, which is where the keep is, right? Just like our diagram that we have, okay? So not complex. Once you've put together that, then we can start deciding some use cases. What do we want to put inside the Bailey, each Bailey, right? Now there's a lot of use cases. This is a really fun kind of map that you can do a lot of different things with. So let's open up some use cases. The most simplest and the easiest one is historical, okay? Where there is simply a keep within the top Bailey, and in the bottom Bailey is some infrastructure. And right where those fences are, you would paint in some kind of crop, okay? And little trick about crops, just make sure you rotate them. Don't have them at a perfect 180 or 90 degrees because it's too much of a straight line. Rotate that crop with the rotate function just a little bit, because crops just look really weird when they're at perfect 90 or 180, okay? So just a little trick on that. And usually the infrastructure is things like a farmer with that farm, maybe a blacksmith, and then of course you could have stables, barracks, so that people can exit from the barracks and quickly get to the defensive positions. So that's the more historical approach to your Motte and Bailey, but this is D&D. This is Dungeons and Dragons, right? So you can do some fun stuff. So let's try a couple other ideas besides that, okay? You could make it an invasion where you're trying to get within the Bailey, right? Maybe you're trying to go with your people, with your team inside, and you're trying to maybe get treasure or kill the leader of a group, whether you're doing it stealth-wise or full-on frontal assault, okay? So lots of different options there. I've put in a series of palisades and blood and some weapons that are broken in the ground to kind of show that there's an invasion taking place here. So that's one way. But it could also be the opposite. You could be the defenders while people are trying to get in. Or maybe someone got kidnapped and you're trying to infiltrate to go save the person who's been kidnapped, right? So lots of different options there. Maybe there's a slave camp there. And, as evil slavery, they're going to evil slavers. You want to go in and just take out these baddies and free these poor slaves. So you could go with that. Same concept before, that upper place for the keep would be maybe where the slave boss is, whatever species or class you want to make them. And of course, at the bottom here, you would have some kind of viewing gallery so that, buyers could look at the slaves and see what they want. So some cages, a platform for them to stand and to be observed, and a gangway for overseers to see. So you have your gangway here, you go up the steps, and there's a direct vision to the platform right here, right? And whenever you're putting in details, you think about access, right? So there's access from each one of these caves, or cages, not caves. So there's always that. So there's a lot of different options that you can kind of choose from. There's also, let's say that you want to make it a bandit camp. Now, like I said, encampments work great here. Let's say that you're trying to sneak in. Maybe something was stolen from you in the middle of the night and you tracked the bandits to their stronghold, to their little camp here. And so you see that there's only about 6 bandits with the 6 tents, and at the top, the bandit lord or bandit king or bandit leader is with their own kind of fire pit there. And you can throw in all kinds of details, firewood, logs, maybe some wall walk so that it's more easily defended. Lots of different options. And then, of course, there's also all kinds of encampments that you can make. Another one is an orc encampment. And whenever you're kind of making a different theme, I try to add some items to make it so whenever you're using a theme, you stick to a pack. So if you're using an orc encampment, check out the orc pack and use stamps within that pack. Notice that I've got some tusks coming out of the mottes as well to kind of give it some extra flair. You have the big tribal leader at the top, which represents the keep. And of course, within the Bailey, there is either infrastructure or acolytes or bodyguards or whatever it is that you want. Okay, so when it comes to a Motte and Bailey, there's a lot of different things that you can do. Hey, first time chatter, yes, I totally agree with you. Those tents are huge. They're probably, let's actually go back real quick. Now that we've set a scale, we can go back and kind of review that real quick. Let me open up the bandit camp. Those tents will be huge, absolutely. There's probably a lot more, but that doesn't mean that there has to be a lot in there. When you're doing your campaign, it's very much possible that some of them left, and there's only a couple there to defend. But you're right. These tents are about 10 square feet, maybe 11 by 10 square feet. So you could fit about maybe 2 people within these. So if all of the people were there, then you would have 2 per tent. That would be 12 people. That's a lot. But you don't have to do that as a DM. Remember, you can choose. Maybe there's just 4 people there and then a boss at the top. Everyone else is gone. So those options are up to you, of course, right? So not complex, but you can see that the grid is on. And one of the things I do recommend is putting things together with the grid. Notice that that I've set up the bridge to be 10 feet across. So that way you have traffic going in and out on two sides, but still easily defensible. And there's no railing, so any attackers can get pushed off that bridge. Okay, and notice that, you know, the fire pit is about 5 square feet, maybe a little bit bigger. And it looks like the leader's tent is pretty big as well. But I would expect a more luxurious tent for the leader of the group, right? Okay, let's go cover a couple things here that I didn't mention. I want to make sure I cover textures because sometimes people get confused on how to do textures. First, let's go over what I've used. If you open up your catalog, F key for the brush, and there's this awesome little tag right here. You click add a filter, it's that yellow tag, and you click used in this map, okay? And what this will do is it will show all the textures, not the ones that have been adjusted with the color options, but the ones that you've used in their default. So you can kind of go over everything. And what I love to do is to start with, think of painting. You start with one coat or a primer, then you start with a second coat and a third coat and maybe even a fourth coat. It just depends. It's that same concept when you're texturing. You first apply your first coat. And what I used was the basic grass texture. And then after, that's going to be the base texture or your primer. Next comes that second coat. That second coat that I used was going to be this log kind of one right here, because all the wood and materials that were used to make that Motte and Bailey type castle had to come from somewhere. It comes from the surrounding area. So having some fallen logs on the ground is a great way to show that the resource of that area has been taken up and used, right? Once you've applied that second coat, and I didn't apply it everywhere, I just did it in blotches, then I apply parts of dirt, different types of dirt. There are two of them, one with some darker brown blotches and this lighter brown one without blotches. And then I used what are called alphas, and there are two of them. This moss alpha works fantastic for showing little patchwork of grass or thicker grass. And the one thing that I recommend, of course, is that when you choose your textures, if you've chosen a stamp size, if the majority of your stamps are at size 50, remember to scale down your textures to around 50 as well, or whatever size you've decided, okay? Alpha textures are magic. So this moss texture is fantastic. This orc dry grass texture works great to show beaten down grass where people have walked. It has this dead grass feel to it, or dirt feel. So it works great for showing traffic, foot traffic. And I've applied that in here. So let me just go ahead and show you here. See, I've got that dry grass right here. I'll go ahead and pull up a path so you can see it. So you got this nice dry grass right here. That texture it's beautiful. It's an alpha, so it will pick up textures behind it as well. So it's perfect for blending. Same thing with this moss texture right here. See this moss texture? This thing is fantastic for blending. It also works just great to show grass tufts. Remember to rescale. The other texture I used was this forest texture. Remember, I wanted logs lying around because I wanted to show that resources were expended here, right, to create this fort. So that's it really for textures. I didn't really use very many. We can go back into that stamp catalog real quick and we can take a look at it again. There wasn't very many. I couldn't be more than about 6 or 7. 7 textures total. You may look at this and say, well, no way. It's just 7 textures. It's just about choosing the right textures and knowing how to use the color filter options or color options to make sure that they're the right brightness, contrast, whatever you might be using to try to make things fit together. So texturing, easier than you think. Just follow first coat, which is your primer, your first coat, your second coat, your third coat. It's just the same concept when you're texturing. The last thing that I want to mention is light and shadow, and then filters, obviously. Let's go ahead and do light and shadow. I'm going to go ahead and turn these on. What I like to generally do is remember I showed you that shadow trick? I put a path shadow in the middle of the moat or ditch to show that it's going downward, okay? So that gave it a little bit of a shadow. Let me turn off the ditch shadow real quick so you can see what it looks like without. When you see it without, it seems kind of flat, right? But then when you apply that shadow, it looks like it's going down inward, okay? So that's help. The second one is adding in lights, okay? And I put the light sources directly inside the Palisade walls within the Bailey, so just to make it pop out a little bit more from the ground below. Remember the trick for depth, contrast. Those two Baileys of that Motte and Bailey castle are higher up than the ground, so adding a light source on top of all of that, layer 5, is a great way to make sure that it looks just like that they're popping out, okay? All right. Now, the last step is just adding filters. And the way that you decide filters is really the look that you're going for. So there's a lot of different options that we can use for it. Let's go ahead and take a look at those options. I'm going to open it up. I'm going to turn all the filters on to see what I ended up coming up with. But there's a lot of different things that you can end up doing. One of the first ones I always recommend is a clarity filter. Let's just turn that on real quick and see what that does. A clarity filter immediately causes things to pop out more. It kind of does a mix of focusing or sharpening on top of saturating as well. So it saturates and it also sharpens a bit of the image. It's called clarity. Great to use, and you can decide with filters how much by just using the opacity filter, the opacity slider bar to decide. Okay, so clarity is always a good first choice. Next, I'm going to use a vignette. Much of the combat is going to be taking place within or around the Motte and Bailey. So using a vignette shadow kind of blurs out or darkens the edges of the map that aren't going to be used quite as much. And it may seem bare out there. You look around on the outside and it may seem kind of bare, but you would expect that. All the trees would be cut. Much of the bushes would be taken out. And the reason why is because you don't want obstructions from your view, and you don't want your enemies to be hiding within the brush or hiding behind a tree. So everything usually gets cut and leveled around the Motte and Bailey so that way there's a clear view of attackers and there's no place for the attackers to hide. Okay? All right. So let's keep going with filters. The next one is going to be adding a red sky. There's already a lot of reds in here already with that dirt brown and stuff. So if you turn on that red filter, it's going to give a little bit more red. I want this brownish feel to it. I want this kind of woody, kind of wood-like feeling. So red is a great one. It also causes some of the greens to turn a little red, giving it a more of a dirt feel, because that's what I think of in a Motte and a Bailey. It's not made of stone like a so what was the name of that keep? A shell keep or a stone keep. So I think dirt. It's not made of stone, it's dirt. So red sky works great. And if you feel like there's too much red, you can turn it off or apply another filter like winter. Okay, I personally don't really like the winter one. I'll just turn it off. But it's up to you. But there's a lot of different options that you can kind of choose from. Okay, but that's as simple as that. Let's quickly review the process real quick. And remember, this is the process for any map. I don't, by the way, Emmanuel AV2, have a channel in Spanish. Deepest apologies. No hablo español. My apologies. Remember, let's just quickly go over the process again. Remember, first things first, set your scale. You use the grid. Terrain. Remember, you're building up. Walls to make the enclosed spaces in which your players will be moving around. Access. How on earth do your players get into the enclosed spaces? How do they get out of the enclosed spaces? How do attackers move back and forth or defenders go back and forth, moving around? Access is absolutely important. Once you've added the access, the walls, the terrain, start texturing to blend everything together. Remember the big trick? Just think in coats. Primer, first, second, third, how many coats you want. A way to make less coats is using the alpha textures because they're great blending textures, okay? After doing texture, do your light and shadow. Remember the trick with the path tool, just set it to blur, make it thick, and that will work great for shadow. You can also use different blend modes. You can use an overlay blend mode, which works great with a black shadow because it won't completely darken it out. Entirely up to you. And then finally, of course, you throw in details. I'm not throwing in any details on this one, but really details are really just determined by the function. Whatever the function of the map is, that's going to determine a lot of its form and a lot of the details on it. So if it was a thief's fort, you would have maybe bags, crates, maybe a carriage, or maybe a wheelbarrow, whatever items they stole from on being on the road or a mountain treacherous pass, whatever it might be. Details can include all kinds of things. Maybe you want to tell a story. Maybe someone died here. Put some blood, put a body, put a skeleton. Details are all about deciding on telling a story. And if you get confused on details, remember the function of the map will decide its form. So if it's a bandit camp, add details that are appropriate to a bandit's camp. If it's an orc's camp, then throw in tusks, throw in orc weapons, throw in blood, throw in a rack, a torture device, whatever it is you want. If they're good orcs, that's fine. Whatever your choice is, okay? It's up to you. All right, well, hey, that is it for this stream. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. I think next week we are going to be doing tips and tricks for land masses. And there's about 3 or 4 different ways that I know how to make land masses, and I will share those all with you. Hey, thank you so much, everyone. Please stay safe and healthy. Merry map making, and I'll see you all next week for the next stream. Okay? Hey, Auf Wiedersehen, everyone.